Hello. Can you let in Barbara and Naomi? Or can I? Oh, I can too. I can't hear you. Even though, oh, there we go. Hello.
Hello.
This is Leaf, who's helping out with tech.
Hi, Lee. Good to meet you.
Leaf, do you see the thing that makes it go live on Facebook? Oh, I can't hear you. I hear you click, but I don't hear your voice.
Hello?
Yes.
Now we hear you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm all ready. I can click the go live button whenever you all are ready.
Okay. Oh, here's Barbara. Okay, I've let in Naomi and Barbara, and now I'll leave letting in people to you.
Okay, just let me know when you're ready.
Hey, Barbara. You're muted, but Leaf is here because they're doing tech.
Hello, wonderful to meet you.
Just so you know, you're muted, Barbara. Okay. Okay. Great, I can read your lips perfectly. You should do the whole thing like that.
I guess we should be muted for now because you're going to do intros. That's the first thing that's going to happen. Is that good?
Yeah, I'll talk for a little bit. And we'll let people in at like a minute after. Unless you want to let them in waves, whatever you think is best.
I see a button where we can just let them all in once.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like it to go live before they enter or after?
Maybe like admit all, go live, and then by the time you come back, there'll be like another 20 people to admit.
Amazing.
Okay. Ready when you are.
All right, here we go.
Welcome, everyone. We are so honored to have you here at We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest, a radical commencement conversation with Naomi Jaffe and Barbara Smith. We're gonna let people trickle in for the next few minutes, so hang tight. You should be muted when you come in, but if you're not, please put yourself on mute. everyone that's just joining us. We are so pleased to have you here at We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest, a radical commencement conversation with Naomi Jaffe and Barbara Smith. We're just gonna let people trickle in for another few minutes. In the meantime, I would love to invite participants to use the chat, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom application. You can write in there your name, your pronouns, and where you're coming from, whether that be your physical location or your emotional state. You should be muted when you're let into the room, but if you're not, go ahead and mute yourself. Also, we are recording this, so if you do not want to be on camera, just go ahead and turn your camera off. This is also live streaming to the event Facebook page. Great to see all this in the chat. Glad to see people have full bellies. I'm going to do one more round of we are so honored to have you all here at We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest conversation with Naomi Jaffe and Barbara Smith. We're going to get going here. We are recording this, so if you don't want to be on camera, go ahead and turn off your camera on the bottom left of your Zoom application. You can also use the chat, which you can find in the bottom right of your Zoom application, to share with us your name, pronouns, and where you're coming from, either where you're at physically or just how you're doing. All right. So we are going to have you. This event is hosted by SOMAD, Students Organizing Mutual Aid and Defense. This group emerged just in the past few months as students were being evicted from their college campuses, made to move away from where their health coverage is. And we started off as a network of students from campuses all across the country, and in a few other countries as well, that were sharing resources and spreadsheets about how to get as many students as possible and communities as possible connected to emergency housing, food, transportation, funding. Since then, we've gotten to know a lot of folks, many of whom I'm very happy to see on this call. And in the more long-term phase that we're moving into now, we've taken up an affinity group and caucus structure, which is a traditionally anarchist way of organizing that relationships and building skills with the people that we live near and work most closely with. We have an emphasis on direct action and fulfilling our own needs rather than asking for them. And I'm gonna ask Sophia, who is our designated link dropper, to drop our Facebook group, which is the wider Student Mutual Aid Network Facebook group, as well as the sign up to get more involved with SOMAD. So one of the things that came out of these large network calls we're having with SOMAD, 15 to 50 people, depending on the time, was a bunch of energy behind a radical study group and a youth radical study group. So we've been holding meetings like this almost weekly for the past few months on things like critical pedagogy, the landless workers movement in Brazil and agricultural resistance, rapid response to ICE in semi-rural and rural communities hosted by the Vermont and New Hampshire National Lawyers Guild, Student Power workshop series, which talked about skills, history, and theory behind student power. And coming up in just a few weeks, we have a panel discussion on Rojava, dual power, and radical education. The Facebook link for that is going to go in the chat. We'll be joined with Debbie Bookchin, who maybe is on this call. And now this conversation, which is once again, We Who Believe in Freedom, cast a radical commencement conversation with Naomi Jaffe and Barbara Smith. So as we speak, the people of Minneapolis are fighting against the state in response to the murder of George Floyd, a cop on Monday. I want to take a moment to say the names of Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Regis Korchinski-Paquette, and Houdini that have all been murdered by police recently in the US and Canada. This is not an extensive list, and we're here to say all power to the people. So tonight, the way that the evening is going to go is we're going to hear stories from Naomi and Barbara. I've got a few prepared questions that we could use or we could not, because most of the evening is going to be questions from the audience. So think about the things that you might want to know from Naomi and Barbara, and also from each other. At the end of this conversation, we will invite people to plug their organizations, events, webinars, Venmos, Cash Apps in the chat, and we'll download the chat and send that out in a follow-up email afterwards. If you're new to Zoom, and there's two different ways you might be viewing. You might be able to see like 20 people right now, or maybe you just see my face. I have a gorgeous face, but probably you want to see a lot of people. On the top right of your Zoom application, you want it to say speaker view. So click over there if you only see my face. I'm gonna let you figure that out yourselves. The other thing is that our friend Leaf will be taking stack. So when it's time for us to all talk together, they will be the one letting you know that it's your turn to talk. I'll repeat this later, but the way we're taking stack is a bit complicated. Stack is a way of saying whose turn it is to speak next. We want people to be able to speak their questions out loud to Naomi and Barbara and all of us here. What we want you to do is put a star, an asterisk, shift 8 in the chat if you want to speak. And we ask that you add just a key word or two about what you want to talk about. So examples are student organizing on community college campuses, Combahee River Collective meetings in Boston, fighting imperialism as a student, Black feminism in organizing spaces, coalitional politics. These are some of the topics you might want to talk about. We ask that you write just a little keyword so that we can get to your questions in an order that makes sense and keeps the conversation flowing. Some other Zoom etiquette. If you really like what somebody's saying, we often put plus signs or plus ones in the chat, and that's like, hell yeah, we love what that comrade's saying. And since this is a conversation, and we hope that it won't just go question and answer from Naomi and Barbara, if you want to also respond to something that a peer said, you can write star response. Star response, and that means you want to speak directly to what's being talked about. Great. So with that, I am honored to introduce you to two prolific activists, Naomi Jaffe and Barbara Smith. Naomi Jaffe organized while a grad student at the New School with Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, and the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, or WITCH. Later, she went on to work with the Weather Underground, and indeed was underground for 7 years between 1971 and 1978. Being involved in both the anti-war movement and the women's liberation movement, her analysis of intersectionality, though Kimberly Crenshaw had yet to coin the term, as strategy is indispensable. And Barbara Smith is an author, activist, independent scholar who has played a groundbreaking role in opening up a national cultural and political dialogue around the intersections of race, class, sexuality, and gender. She was among the first to define an African-American women's literary tradition and to build Black women's studies and Black feminism in the United States. She has been politically active in many movements for social justice since 1960s. I'm sorry about that. She has been politically active in many movements for social justice since the 1960s, including CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and SDS, and the Combahee River Collective. With that, I will turn it over to you, Naomi. You're still muted. Happens to truly everyone. There you go.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Naomi Jaffe. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm here at home in Troy and very honored to be speaking with you. Sarah, thanks for starting us off by rooting us in the grief and rage of this moment in which we are reminded that the murders of Black people and people of color by white vigilantes and white cops are ongoing and have never stopped. And the relevance to this conversation, which is about the kind of work that we're going to do to try to make the world a better place, that we are doing, that we will do to make the world a better. Sharing this moment of rage and grief. Barbara and I are working together on a forum about prosecutors in Albany, and then Barbara and another of the women on the planning committee reminded us this morning to remember how central it is that these murders are not only directed at men, but very much directed at women, at trans people, and gender nonconforming people of color who have been under nonstop attacks for just being who they are in this society. So I just want to remember to center that sense of the centrality of racism and of our rage and grief at this time in history. For those of you who are commencing, graduating, I want to wish you meaning and purpose and focus in your lives and an opportunity to be part of making the world better. Be a force for good in this world. And that's not easy to achieve at any time, and it's certainly very hard to achieve at this time. You asked me and Barbara to be with you at various important, at this turning point in your lives, and that's because I think you asked us because we're both lifelong activists, and you want to look at what that means and what it means to have been lifelong activists, what it means to have tried to do this work of social justice for not only years, but many decades in both of our cases. And to live lives of radical activism. And these would be Barbara's words, to live to tell about it. And then what that means for you, living in very different times. So I want to start, before I say a few words about my life and activism, I want to start by looking at that question about what is for you? What do our lives, how do our lives have, and the story of our lives have meaning for you? If you see a painting if you see a painting that you like, that painting doesn't help you get, and it doesn't even help you to paint in the same style. It might even make you think that because you can't paint that way, you shouldn't bother to try to be a painter at all. But what it could do at best is to remind you that humans can create beauty in all kinds of different ways, and that you too are human. And so our words as elders, at best, are meant to do that as well. I was born an inconceivably long time ago, in ancient times. I was born in 1943 during World War II. And I was born into a Jewish family struggling, extended Jewish family struggling to make a living on a chicken farm in very rural New York State. A family barely a generation away from the poverty and pogroms of Eastern Europe. And around the time that I was born, the families, the extended families of my parents and grandparents being slaughtered in the villages that they came from in Lithuania and Eastern Europe, almost to the last person. My parents were in touch with them. People wrote back and forth and sent photos back and forth, sent packages. And then during the Nazi invasion, lost touch. And so my parents and my other elders didn't really know what had happened. It took a little while for them to find out. And when they did find out, they didn't share it with us children. We had to find out ourselves by eavesdropping, by reading books. And so I didn't really know that for quite some time. And yet I feel that in some way that knowledge crept into my soul almost from the beginning of my life, and fundamental ways defined who I am. And that was the knowledge that very terrible things can happen in the world. Very terrible things are done by some people to other people. And that any of those terrible things that could happen to anybody could also happen to me. And so I never had that aha moment when I figured out that all of the happy myths that are told to us about our wonderful society and our wonderful world weren't true. I always knew that. My aha moment was different. And it came after I'd been an activist for quite some years, actually for several years. I was in graduate school. And my aha moment was when I realized that you could define your life by working in opposition to those forces. And that I wasn't alone in feeling what I felt. That was around, it was in New York City, my first year of graduate school around 1967, and everything was bubbling in New York. In those years, there was a burgeoning student movement. The movement against the war in Vietnam was ferocious. We were very influenced by the civil rights movement and the emergence of the Black Power movement. I heard Malcolm X speak. I had friends who went to the South with SNCC to participate in movements to vote, to register voters in very dangerous parts of the South. Race, I was just starting to see the centrality of race and of racism. That wasn't something I was born with. That was something I had to learn. And in New York in those years, I was beginning to learn it. The student shutdown of Columbia, for example, made the connection between Columbia's research in support of the US war in Vietnam and Columbia's racism in the community that it was toward the community that it was located in Harlem. And then as I was part of founding the SDS chapter at the new school where I was a student, and was connected to the student movement throughout New York City. We as young women were just starting to look at what that meant, that we were women in this movement, and what it meant that our position was different from the position of men and not as powerful. And we were just starting to call it sexism. So I joined WITCH, as Sarah mentioned, the rather fancifully named Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. And I went to the first anti-Miss America pageant protest in Atlantic City. That was the first time I was arrested, the first of many times that I was arrested in that protest. I also was selected to be part of the first student delegation, peace delegation to North Vietnam. And I went to North Vietnam and saw, and what definitely changed my life. I saw a very poor country standing up successfully to the mightiest military machine the world has ever known, and got a sense of what a different kind of power could be, of what people's power actually could be. And then I came back to the bubbling cauldron of New York in the late 60s. And it wasn't enough. It was too slow. The war and racism were too terrible. We couldn't stand it. We couldn't wait. And we began to look at more militant ways of trying to oppose it. Some people started to escalate militant language. We picked fights with cops. We picked fights with other people. We trashed capitalist property. We went to the Woodstock Festival and walked around among the naked stoned kids saying, there's no peace and love in the world. There's a war going on in Vietnam. You've got to end it. That was our relationship to Woodstock. It was close to where I grew up, the Woodstock Festival. And so we started to form cells to do more militant actions. And one of those cells was making a bomb that was intended for a military base and blew up a townhouse in New York and killed 3 of our precious comrades. And after that, we went underground. I went underground. I left everything behind and lived underground lived clandestinely for close to 10 years in an organization that claimed credit for dozens of non-lethal bombings of targets that were intended to demonstrate the racism, white supremacy, and imperialism of the US, both at home and abroad. And then after all that, it was 1979, 40 years to account for, and I'm probably over my time already. During those 40 years, I participated in movements against apartheid and racism, solidarity with liberation movements in Central America and Africa for feminist and Black feminist and LGBTQ justice, against numerous wars and interventions for Black and people of color political power, supporting political prisoners. You get a chance to do a lot in a long life. And then most recently, in the past 10 or 15 years, I've been involved in the movements against incarceration, particularly the statewide and local movements in New York State to end incarceration. And in the course of that, I built a life of 48 years with a partner. I had a kid who grew up and had his own kids, and unbelievably and magically, had the amazing good luck to end up with grandchildren. So that's the short story of my life. And I want to just make 2 small points. I want to distill 2 very small points out of that 76 year history. If I could give you one clue that might be helpful out of those years. Sense, how do you develop a framework of understanding for the swirl of information and misinformation that's coming at you from all sides? Let me start you off with this one clue, which is my motto, really. There is no path to liberation that does not lie through international solidarity. There is no path to liberation that does not lie through international solidarity. This country is the greatest purveyor of violence the world has ever known. White supremacy, it's white supremacist intervention around the world mirrors the white supremacy that we are experiencing here at home, and we cannot do it alone. Fight against this evil, violent system can only be a global fight. And in order to be able to fight it, we have to know something about it. We've got to understand it. Decolonize your bookshelf. Decolonize your internet hits. Learn about that fight. And then the challenge, of course, is how we apply that learning to the everyday work that we're doing. And the second point, let me try to be quick here. I know I'm probably a little over time. The second point is, how do you live with the despair of decades and decades of fighting this fight and not winning it? With facing this vast mountain of evil in our world. All of us, it's normal to feel that despair. We're living in a world that's terrifying and has been, actually, as I said. If you've been looking at the global impact of this violence, it has been terrifying for hundreds of years. And yet we haven't won. We haven't won yet, but we also haven't lost yet. This conversation between generations is a symptom of what it means that we haven't lost yet. I believe that everything that we do to resist injustice, to tell the truth about oppression, makes the world a better and a different place in the moment that we do it. And it also makes resistance possible generation to generation. When we were young radicals, our slogan in the Weather Underground and SDS was revolution in our lifetime. But when I went to Vietnam, their slogan was, we will fight from one generation to the next. That's what we're trying to do here tonight. And I wish you the reward of a life that's striven, a life of striving to make the world a better place.
I'll pass it straight off to you, Barbara. Still muted.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarah. And hello, everybody. This is so exciting. I'm so glad to be with you. I should tell you, I love graduations. I've gone to all kinds of graduations. I have no children, so you can imagine how much I love graduations, that I've been to lots and lots of them. I'm going to see other people's children, some who are chosen can, of course. But this is certainly a unique one during a really unprecedented era of tragedy and also of oppression and cruelty. Albany, New York. My name is Barbara Smith. I'm across the river from Naomi, who's in Troy. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And it's, as I said, it's just really wonderful that we can do this, that we can all do this together. I want to mention that my sister, Beverly Smith, if all has gone well, is on the call. So you have 2 of the 3 co-authors of the Combahee River Collective Statement with you this evening. Pretty great. And that's part of the wonder of this technological age. I was speaking to her shortly before this call, and we were talking about what it feels like to have continued racial terrorism during a time of a pandemic, and how even with the pandemic, the just inborn, it seems, script of annihilating Black bodies does not cease. So we have all these examples, and more than we know, because they don't report most of them, of Black people being the targets of, the victims of extrajudicial killings in the context of mass incarceration. And it's just so painful, particularly for people like my sister and myself. We're twins, actually, and who've lived through so many iterations of the same old story. Unlike Naomi, I wasn't born that long ago. I was born in 1946. So that was 3 years after Naomi. It depends on how you look at it. Doesn't seem like that long ago to me. I'm a part of the post-war baby boom. I know boomers have little credibility these days, but I am one of them, and proud of it. And meeting Sarah has been wonderful. I met her through Naomi, and Sarah is incredibly talented in many ways, and she asks really good questions. So I'm actually going to respond to some of the questions. She gave us lots of questions. I'll only respond to a few of them. But the first question that I wanted to talk about is, like, how did I get politically active? I have been active. Naomi and I basically are, we are from the same generation, and we became active around the same time. And our lives very much have dovetailed with each other. We met in the mid-1980s in Albany, but there were other touch points too. The reason I became politically active is that I was born into Jim Crow. And if that's the case, and you're politically alert and sensitive and really don't like injustice, that motivated a lot of people, a lot of Black people, I should say, of my generation and of an older generation, older and younger, but people who were active in the mid to late 20th century. We were motivated because we were absolutely tired of US apartheid. So that's what motivated me to become politically active. One of the things that Naomi talked about, and I'm so glad that she went first so that my talk can be better than it would have been had I gone first. She talked about how the people in her family, Jewish family, how they didn't really talk that much about what was going on during the Holocaust in Europe. And that's so similar to what happened in my family around my family having escaped from the Deep South to the North. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and they didn't really talk that much about what they had experienced as far as segregation, racism, violence. They just didn't really talk about it. But I feel much like Naomi, and I don't think we've ever discussed this actually one-on-one, much like Naomi, I feel like they didn't have to talk about it. I got it through my pores. I mean, I just got it from being around them, that they had experienced terrible things, and yet they were going to do everything possible to protect us and to give my sister and me a better life. My actual profession is teaching Black studies, specifically Black literature. One of the reasons well, there are many reasons to love it, but one of the reasons I love it is that I find out things about myself and about my family that I can't find out or couldn't find out because virtually everyone in my family who I grew up with was gone, that is, had died by the time I was in my late 20s. So the kinds of questions I might have asked them, I never had that opportunity. But one of the things I found out is that where they came from, which was rural Georgia, between Macon and Savannah, I found out just in the last couple of years, since the Lynching Memorial Museum has opened, that Georgia had the second highest number of lynchings of any state in the nation, second after Mississippi. So, as I said, I got it through my pores. Moving then on, I started becoming active as a teenager around the issue of school desegregation in Cleveland. The adults in the civil rights movement pulled young people in on purpose, and that's how I got to be politically active in a very meaningful way as a late teenager. When I went to college in 1965, the Vietnam War was absolutely underway, and the civil rights movement was transforming into the Black liberation, Black power movement. So it wasn't that the civil rights movement had ended by any means, but it was changing from that beloved community model that had been the case when I first got involved. I went to an historically white college, which is Mount Holyoke College, also a women's college. And I was a part of desegregating that institution. I was involved in Black student organizing. I also was involved in protesting the war in Vietnam. And that was kind of unusual for a Black woman, a young Black woman at that time. I've never liked being told what to do, and I've never liked injustice. My feeling about being politically active is that if you're not, what you're basically saying to people who think they have all the power, and sometimes do, they back it up with violence and other kinds of, horrible sanctions. But I feel like if you're not politically active, at least in my case, maybe I should just speak for myself, that you're basically saying, that's fine, massa, whatever you say. I love having your foot buried on my neck. And that is particularly a poignant thing. I've said that many times, that metaphor of the massa standing with his foot on your neck. Well, that's exactly what happened to Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis. Ridiculous, just absolutely ridiculous. And by ridiculous, I mean patently ridiculous in relationship to anything that we would define as human behavior or humane behavior. But yet, it continues and continues to happen. I've always been very passionate about making change. There was a point when I didn't think I'd ever be politically active again, and that was when Black nationalism was at its height. And the roles as demanded and prescribed for women, I just couldn't see it, because my family had worked really hard to make sure my sister and I had a better life. They all worked, you know, of course, they had jobs. Most Black women have always worked. Like my future as being solely defined by my reproductive capacity and having babies for the nation. So I just thought, no, not walking 3 or 7 steps behind, not going to be having babies for the nation. So like for a while, I was not doing much political activism. I'm pretty well known for having been involved with building Black feminism in the United States. And a lot of the things that I did from, I would say, the early to mid 70s on had to do with, it doesn't exist, I need it, I think I better try to get it and make it. So that's why teaching Black women writers when nobody else thought that they had ever written anything worthwhile, building Black women's studies, and particularly building a Black feminist movement. Those were things that I was very, very committed to. And it was an intersectional Black feminist movement. We looked at race, class, gender, sexuality, and class. And one of the reasons that the Combahee River Collective Statement is known and read to this day, and I think this is important for how you be an activist and an organizer for a lifetime. One of the reasons that that has had such staying power, that is the work that we did in the late 70s in the Combahee River Collective, and putting that down on paper in the statement, is that we had an analysis of how the pieces fit together. And when things happen, like to this day, and people are saying, well, why did that happen? Or what can we do? It's like, I don't usually wonder about why something happened, because we're grounded. You know, I'm a socialist. We're grounded in a dialectical, materialist, feminist, anti-racist understanding of reality, so we don't have to really try to put the pieces together every time something atrocious happens. We understand, we have an understanding because we have an analysis. We don't have to feel hopeless. We know that there's a way to move forward. We're not going to get it done necessarily in Naomi's and my lifetime, but we certainly have given it our best. I think that you, the younger people, and all the people, but particularly those of you who have some decades ahead of you, I think that you will continue and can continue that vision, that commitment, with courage that we have tried to also operate with in our lives. We're not special. Naomi and I are not special, not really. We are committed. And what we are committed to, anyone can take part in if they so decide, if they so are so moved that they wish to get us to some facsimile or reality of humane life and justice, you know, for our planet. As I said, we're not special. We're just two who are with you this evening telling you stories, and we really appreciate that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Of course, we are about 13 minutes behind schedule, which is amazing because there's a lot to hear about. We're gonna transition station. So just to reiterate the stack, go ahead and put a star in the chat with a keyword of what you might want to talk about. There's already one in there that says star relational organizing. I might put in star how do I decide? And then Leaf will let you know when it's your turn to ask.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah. We are going to start with Nora.
Hi, thanks so much for speaking to us tonight. It feels really special. I'm really grateful to have this as my commencement. So thanks to both of you and to Sarah and all the other organizers. I am somebody who's just kind of getting into a serious consideration of my political education and getting involved in organizing. And the kind of organizing that I've been involved with so far, we've called it relational organizing. And I'm wondering, I guess it's been really interesting to me to think about the ways that the work that we're doing is built on our relationships with each other. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about sort of your experiences just working with fellow activists, and then how that relates to experiences outside of activism, like Naomi, with your family. I'm wondering if you are thinking about, I wonder if you think about your family as being separate from your work, or how you see that as being tied to or not tied to your work.
Can you say a word about what your group meant when you decided to call the work that you were doing relational activism? Why did you decide to call it that, and what did you mean by it, and what does it look like to you?
That's a good question. I'm just at the beginning of learning about that, but in my understanding, I think it's about, rather than relying all the time on like formalized structures of power and hierarchies, I think we're building relationships in a less formal way, and making space for that, and prioritizing time where we hang out together and support each other in ways that aren't necessarily explicitly related to the like the strategic work that we're doing. Does that make sense? And maybe Sarah could say more about it.
Sarah.
Something that we are in the same organization, Bennington College Student Union, and we talk a lot about organizing at the speed of trust, a concept that I read through Adrienne Marie Brown, that means that we need to center the ways that we are not just working for each other, but with each other, and that our building trust will help us struggle together in the long run.
So I guess part of that question is what the relationship is between one's life as a person in the world, as an individual in the world, in relationship to your family and other people, and the work that you do. And I guess in a way, the shortest answer I have for that is that one of the greatest blessings of being an activist is that the people that you work with are the best people. You get to work with people whose lives are dedicated to making the world a better place, and the trust comes from that mutual dedication. And it's really one of the hardest things, really. Building the contradictions between people who are trying to struggle for a better world together are sometimes the most painful ones. And don't think that they're, I guess the word of wisdom is that don't think that those are two separate things. The inside work that we have to do to build our own communities, and the outside work that we have to do a terrible social system, are really two sides of the same coin. They're both, what's out there is in here, and you have to do them both. You can't only focus on your small, on the small size. You also you have to see the big picture and integrate it into the small struggles in your everyday life, and vice versa. So I guess that was what we meant by consciousness raising, and also by the personal as political. That the two things really aren't separate. I mean, our lives are examples of life in this world. We are examples of people who live in this society. And that's part of what makes it difficult for us to build that kind of trust and those kinds of modules with each other. And so it's vital work to do, but it has to be done also in connection with confronting and taking on the evils around us. You can't have one without the other.
Thank you.
Amazing. We have so many questions. It's very exciting. We're grouping them a little bit by topic. So next we'll go to Indigo and then keep going along.
Hi, yeah, I just want to
Really
say thank you so much for being here.
Really quick, I just want to say that this event goes until 8:15, and we'll continue with question and answer until about 8.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'll try and make this quick. Yeah, so last year I was trying to work on 3 different causes, like getting like climate, LGBTQ plus rights, and guns, and it was really burning me out. So I tried to do like climate activism, just like really go in depth into that. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how to like manage what kind of causes you want to champion if you're like want to champion so many, because I can't like do it all. And I was wondering if you had any tips.
Thank you. It's not possible to respond to everything that you see that is wrong going on in our communities and in our society, etc. That's just not possible. I always say that if you're involved in organizing and it's making you miserable, you go home. Well, now we're always at home, but in the days when we used to go out and then come back, if you go home every evening or whatever, and you feel drained and upset and unseen, then you're not in the right place. You always have to be somewhere doing this unpaid, arduous, often frightening, nitpicky detailed work. Some of it's boring. You always have to be someplace where you basically feel good about what it is you're working on and who with. And my feeling about how you choose what you wish to work on, it's like what you think you are most is most akin to your interests, what you have the most to bring to. But like our responsibilities, I think, as those internationalist organizers that Naomi talked about, even though we can't be involved in every issue or movement, it's really good to be alert to what other people are struggling with and what are other people's struggles. So one chooses to be involved with working on the climate crisis, etc. That's really good. But you also, and I'm not talking about you personally, of course, one also needs to have a grasp of why Black people and brown people and trans people continue to be murdered at the very same time. So, and that's usually not how work is done in the United States, or maybe anywhere, but people love to run away from the stuff that makes them uncomfortable. And having a serious practice of opposing oppression, that means that, so you're working on climate issues on a regular basis, but when a crisis arises or a situation arises that is an attack on our communities of color, you're there. There's a way to manifest that. You don't have to go to the meetings, you don't have to do whatever, but you figure out a way to be there and be in solidarity with people. So that's what I think. But don't do organizing that makes you miserable. You won't get very far.
Thanks. Next, we're gonna do 2 questions at once, and then if it's all right, you all can respond to both. We are gonna have Carlin about the role of students, followed by Vivian about youth recruitment.
Thank you both for your words. I'm wondering about the role of student organizing in changing the world, and moreover the role of educational institutions as sites of struggle. You both talked about your experience as student organizers, and I'm wondering how you think students can be agents of political change, and also your experience moving from student organizers to graduates.
Vivian?
Sorry, yeah. I'm here on Skid Row. I'm representing Los Angeles Community Action Network, and as of recent, especially with George Floyd's assassination, there's been a large, I think, problem. I mostly work with escalation of the lumpen proletariat towards clandestine action, and I think that there's a huge lacuna in terms of the recruitment of young people, and particularly their escalation. And I was wondering if you could speak to, maybe especially Naomi, but both of you, to these sort of parallel tracks of radicalizing them towards political action and then radicalizing them towards more clandestine direct action that's happening under the surface, and how they're often competing. And I feel as if I'm often losing a lot of organizing energy, activation energy, to, strong collective public struggles when that clandestine direct struggle is as collective. And I feel there's only so much collective energy to go around. So I'm wondering how to reckon and re-grasp and re-corral that.
Let me just try to restate them, because there were two questions that are somewhat related, which one is the impact of student activism and the other is the relationship between mass activism and more militant non-legal activism. Those are both really big questions, and so I'm not going to try to answer them in any detail. I hope, Barbara, you'll jump in too, because I think you have a good sense about student and youth activism. I'm just going to tell a quick story about a study group that Barbara organized and that I spoke in one day. And one of the students, one of the young people in that study group asked me, what do you do about the fact that our generation is not involved in activism and doesn't care about it, and it's so hard to convince people in our generation to be activists. And I had 2 answers for that. One, don't idealize our generation. Was definitely, there were a lot of up and down moments, and in retrospect, it looks like everybody was moving. Not true at the time, really. There were plenty of times when you organized a march and nobody came. So those are ups and downs in every generation. But the other thing that I said to her was that the world, that we didn't win. We left you a world that's extremely difficult. We left you a world where the power dynamics are extremely difficult for you to deal with. And the last thing you want is for you as young people to blame your generation for the world that you inherited. You face a very difficult battle, and without answering in detail, the work that you do as young people reflects our ability, our mutual ability as movements to carry on from one generation to the next. And so recognizing the difficulties, and you know, that story that I told about the painting, you really can't paint the painting that we painted. It's a completely, you have a very different world. The kinds of both legal and illegal activism that are available to you are really very different. And so there's no way that I can answer that question for you. And an understanding that the power that we're facing is immense, and that each small thing that we do about it keeps those struggles alive, and is worth doing. And Sarah was asking a lot of questions as we were getting ready for this about the relationship between our past as radical activists and some of the work that we do now, which has to do with mitigation of suffering. And so I maybe could answer it in that way, which is that the suffering caused by the system is immense. A lot of the work that we do has to do with mitigating it. The fight is to mitigate it in a way that challenges its fundamental assumptions. And day to day, that's a very easy thing to say, day to day figuring out how to make that happen is the substance of what our movements are about. I'm sorry it was so general, but the questions are out, you know, would take hours to answer in the kind of system.
Next on stack, we have Naomi P. with a question about intersections with disability and police violence.
Okay, so congratulations, by the way, to people that are graduating. That's fabulous. I was 40 when I graduated from UMass Boston, so I know how special that is. And it was great to hear from Naomi and Barbara. Thank you. So I'm organizing in Massachusetts for people in locked situations who are locked into prisons, jails. My particular interest is psychiatric hospitals, because as a teen, I was homeless and then I was institutionalized for 2 years. So what I see on the left that I find really alienating, and have seen for all the many years I've been involved in various left causes, is the dearth of acceptance, understanding, use of people with disabilities. So I guess the question is, how, as someone who wants to organize intersectionally, who wants to bring together as many groups that are affected by, right now it's COVID-19, but you know, 2 months from now it'll be something else, or it's always something. You know, how can I do better at that? How can I reach out more, get more understanding from wider organizations? So either Barbara or Naomi, and by the way, I just was rereading the Combahee River Collective piece. It's so great, so fabulous. Everybody should have it typed on their forehead or something. Thank you. So, and I was also raised in Jim Crow, born in Atlanta, Georgia, and spent a substantial portion of my childhood in that environment, which shaped me greatly.
That's a great question and great context for it. I guess one of the things I would ask, and I know our time is limited with a back and forth, but one of the things I would wonder about is like, do you and are you connection with a core group of people who do indeed share those priorities, those experiences, and those values, so that you're not feeling like you're on your own, that you're the only messenger to a movement of people who are temporarily able, because all of us at some point, if we live long enough, and we don't even have to live that long, we will begin, if we think of ourselves as non-disabled, that will certainly change as time goes on. So we're temporarily able at best. Be that as it may, do you have a group of people, even if it's a handful, 3 or 4 people who you feel like you're on the page with, and can perhaps strategize together around what you want, how you want to expand the understandings of people, as you said, in the left. I would also say that I think that the most progressive / radical sectors of the feminist movement have perhaps done better around inclusion and respect for people across all kinds of, like all kinds of differences, including, and then all kinds of identities, including with women and others living with disabilities. So the left is one thing, and I think the feminist movement is somewhat different. There's a whole unknown story about that there was an anti-racist feminist movement. Most people don't know that. So when they talk about the 53% of people who voted for Trump, they don't realize that, yeah, but there were interventions going back into the 19th century of people opposing that kind of racism. And as I said, within my experience of the parts of the women's movement that I was involved with, there was more openness perhaps on the doctrinaire left about the importance of looking at the system of oppressing people who live in various and different kinds of bodies.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Next, we're really running out of time, but a couple of questions of similar themes were coming up. So if it's all right, we'll hear quickly from Ian and Anais about their questions, and then move towards wrapping the discussion up for now. Thanks. Ian.
Hello? Hello? No? Yes? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. Apparently, I thought I knew how to use Zoom, and then they were, okay, anyway, I'm gonna move on. I feel like this is probably a question that's like actually way too big to do in 5 minutes, but it feels like something that has come up a lot of times in spaces that I've been, and actually it's kind of one of the spaces where I first encountered Naomi talking about the issues around how to deal with abuse and sexual harassment within organizing and activism spaces. And it's something that I've seen affect a lot of different groups, especially folks who are full of like younger, very, very active, very energetic folks who want to do the right things and you know, we often feel like we're in a space where we're all on the same page about things because we're working for liberation together. And so when abuse occurs within our spaces, it can be very difficult to figure out how to deal with that, and also how to create a space in the first place that where abuse and sexual harassment is much less likely to happen. And like I said, I feel like that's probably too big for for a 2-minute answer, but it's certainly something I've seen in a lot of different spaces happen in different ways, both in sexual harassment and also in just pure abuse in hierarchical spaces, like working in LGBTQ activism as a trans person and seeing the abuse that folks who are lower on the rung of the letters gets from the folks who are higher on the rung, for example. So yes, that is basically my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Anais?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this. Is so good. I guess I'm trying to think now of like how to kind of grow on my questions. I feel like there's a lot of overlap, but I'm just thinking or wondering what accountability has looked like in spaces you've been in, because I think, and how accountability has been held in a way that people stay for a long time. Because I think as students, accountability looks so different for us because our organizing spaces are usually kind of 4-year based. But how to stay in a political home as you grow and change and still care and be in community for these people as you see it going beyond 4 years into a lifetime of organizing, and kind of just what you've learned from that.
Hey, Ewan. Hi. I am. Those two questions are really related, and the very short answer is what's out there is in here, and the way that we fight it inside our communities is completely related to the way that we fight it in the world. We're going to see racism and sexism and heterosexism and homophobia reflected, and that fight within our communities. It has got to be the basis for to be able to fight it in the world. In the movements that I've been in, we've struggled with all sorts of different ways to try to build a movement that can hold people accountable for their interpersonal behavior. And every time we've done it, it's felt like it failed, and yet something shifted in our community. And I'll just say one more quick word about it, and that is that in the anti-incarceration world, what we are trying to do is build, in the anti-incarceration world and in the feminist and anti-violence world, which we have to build an alternative. Because if we think that people should not be in prison, what do we think is the solution to social problems? We have to build that in our communities, and it's not there yet. And when people say to us, what, you're going to let these killers roam free? Those are not, you can't have a flip answer to that. The answer is that we have to build something that's different, and we build it from the bottom up, really. And I would say that I would look at the movements of survivors of violence and of sexual assault, and particularly those parts of those movements that have been led by women of color who say the punishment solution doesn't work for our communities. We've got to build something. We have no choice. We have to build something else because this incarceration system is killing us. And so take a look at some of the literature that's written by some of the women in those movements. Beth Ritchie is one of the authors that's written about that. Maybe we should put up some references afterward, because this is one where you want to see what people have been doing about it. It's in beginning stages. We're swimming upstream in terms of trying to find the resources and the answers in the communities to be a response that's different from the punishment paradigm that's being offered to us as a non-solution.
Thank you so much. So unfortunately, there are many more questions in the chat, but we're going to cut it off there. Actually, about 20 minutes past when we thought we were going to cut it off because there are so many amazing questions. And originally we had planned on sort of closing reflections, but that seemed to me to sort of continually sum up what we are looking for out of this conversation very well. I want to invite participants that didn't get to speak to say 2 things as a sort of closing and debrief in the chat. 2 questions I have for you. 3 questions. First is, are there questions that are coming up for you out of this? Second is, what will change for you because of what you know now? And the third is, what will you keep thinking about from tonight? So I would love to invite you to type that in the chat. What will change because of what you know now? What questions do you still have? What will you keep thinking about? I'm going to read some of them out loud. As someone who is also Jewish, I've always found it hard to have a Jewish identity while considering myself a leftist and dealing with remarks from those who disagree with my political views. How do you represent your Jewish values while also organizing? Feeling of having failed but changed the paradigm is valuable. This is from Beverly Smith. I think people need to continuously work on finding out who they are, to become more and more attuned to how things affect you. For example, be in touch enough with yourself to realize you don't like what you're doing, even if you know the cause is righteous. At the same time, realize that we live in history. It's difficult, but more and more attempt to learn how to read the world, to analyze what's going on, to synthesize what's going on around you. Doing this with other people who are working on the same thing, that is trying to learn this skill, is helpful. The better you get at detecting what's happening in the bigger picture and how it all relates to each other, the better you may be able to make decisions about what you want to work on and what needs your attention immediately. Thinking about how this knowledge can be mobilized to affect real global change, role of relationships, and successfully doing activist work. We have to go in just a few minutes, but I want to invite you, if there's something that we all need to know about, an event. Oh, did I cut it off? Thinking most of all about how this knowledge can be mobilized to affect real global change more than how this will change my personal practices. If there's something that we need to know about, chat. We'll download the chat after and take those pieces out to send to you in a follow-up. Any last words from Barbara or Naomi before we say goodnight?
Thank you for talking and asking and listening and being in dialogue with us. This is our job as elders and our privilege as elders to be in dialogue, to learn, to teach and learn at the same time, to be in conversation with you. It's an honor. I appreciate it and appreciate you. Thank you, Sarah.
I just want to say how much I've enjoyed this and how frustrated I feel that we can't get to, but maybe there's a solution to that, who knows. I just want to say, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and please do not give up. There's so much possibility as long as we just keep that clear vision and those like those kind and caring hearts. There's just so much possibility. We thought we were going to get it all done long before now, and yet we did not, and we're not depressed about it. We just keep on, and so will you. Thank you for an incredible, memorable commencement experience.
Good night.
I'm going to push the end button now. Much love.